The next paper is by two colleagues, Koldo Meso, which is there. I'll make a brief presentation of Koldo. He's a doctor in communication and a lecturer in journalism in the Faculty of Social Communication Sciences of the University of the Basque Country, where he teaches subjects related to media models and online journalism. The paper will be presented by Simón Peña. I've been struggling not to call you Simon. So Simón Peña is presenting the paper. He's an associate professor from the Department of Journalism of University of País Basco. He has a degree on journalism from University of Navarra and also a degree on audiovisual communication from Navarra also. The paper Koldo and Simón are presenting is entitled The Effectiveness of Crowdsourcing for the Emergency of a New Public Sphere.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the University of Beira Interior for inviting us to this conference, especially to Professor Carballeira and everybody at the LabCom who welcomed us so warmly and kindly today when we came from the Basque Country. Today, I would like to say a couple of words along with Professor Meso here about mass media and about journalism especially, because it's something we talked about a long time ago, that maybe we should write a couple of words about the new meaning of crowdsourcing and the appearance of a new public sphere related to the movement of citizen journalism, which is a brand new element in communication, and I think that has brought some interesting ideas in the area of communication. So as Professor Campbell said at the beginning of this session, technology and the new tools available to us have changed in many ways the many fields in our life, especially those related to the way in which we communicate and organize ourselves and obtain information. In this context, we've seen that the development of the figure of the prosumer or the user-generated content that has been favored by the phenomenon of collective intelligence and the power of multitude. And the formerly passive audience now has the possibility of participating in the whole news process, from information gathering to the elaboration and distribution of content. So from this starting point, we can reflect of the existence of other journalism which include citizen journalism. This is a phenomenon helped by the technological empowerment of the population, of course, but also has become an active audience with the capacity to monitor the big media corporations in a global context of crisis of the media and institutions. Technological democratization offers us a choice in favor of openness and transparency in the mass media, where citizen collaboration and participation become a further option when it comes to contributing solutions to common problems. This joint form of working has served different platforms in elaborating rigorous news reports thanks to user collaboration. So, news crowdsourcing is not an alternative model to conventional journalism. Instead, it's a complementary model. So we would say, and we have brought a couple of examples about this, and we will mention a couple of examples also related to what Professor Correia has just explained here. So we come from the age of the mass media, where we had a society with an homogeneous view of the reality, with a limited capacity to select the information, and where everybody got similar news. So that was related and involved the extension of political rights to an increasingly large part of the citizens and the society, caused by a modification of the public sphere so to favor representative in the political, economic, and media powers in detriment of the mass public. Thus, while power became concentrated in the hands of the supposed representatives of the public opinion, for instance, political parties or mass media, the public itself acquired an increasingly marginal role in the decision-making process. So this process in the mass media had some marginal effects that affected quite radically what people could and could not do. In this context, which extends beyond the mid of the 20th century, the mass media organized a mass media companies addressed to massive audiences. And they do so by transmitting a complete flow of new stories and restricting the option of choosing between one and other and the ways of communicating with other peoples and other citizens. Without question, this implies a very limited capacity to select. Because the range of available mass media is relatively scarce, mass media tends to elaborate news menus that are very similar in this age, except from the evident distances of ideological type and separating them. So if we jump to the new audiences, we see that there's been slowly a change in the role and change in the pattern in which audiences relate to the mass media. The close relation existing between the big mass media and the economic power, shown through the advertising funding, for example, and the ownership structure of the media themselves, has affected the way and the quality of the information we have received along decades. Also, the strategy of mutual support that arises on occasion between the mass media and a central faction of political power affects that communication. The process of vertical and horizontal concentration through the creation of multimedia groups with interest in the most diverse sectors, and of course, the result in the decreasing relevance of the mass public in the process of public discussion. So the paradigm change would mean that nowadays we've got a bigger horizontality in the, or greater horizontality in communication. We've got a much more abundant media offer at a lower cost, or even for free in many situations and many occasions. We've got also the possibility of interacting with the communication medium and creating even our new medium. And the development of spaces of exchange, for exchanging opinions, for example, for commenting them or just sharing them, complementary to, or independent of the big media, thanks to the use of different interactive tools, is nowadays a reality. Of course, we've got also an increase in the information sources available for everyone. We've got also a new journalistic and business criteria, meaning that they don't only work for big media corporations, but also for a smaller corporation or even very small institutions that have the same possibilities to spread their messages. And one of the biggest changes probably would be that the audience can have an active role in all this process. The ways in which the audiences start to participate are different. The first one we would like to mention is that audiences have the ability to participate by their own, but also by collaborating with other people. So we create new communities, and those communities, those virtual communities, don't necessarily have any link prior to the link they build in the social networks, for example. The new media agora, the new media square where we meet each other as the public square of antiquity, where relevant affairs of the community are subjected to debate, is placed on the internet. So we've got a new space for sharing and meeting and talking about different topics, and this new square is the square we meet on our laptop, on our mobile phone, or on the device we use more often. This space is also an open and fluid space. It's changing every time, and we will show a couple of examples about how quickly it changes. It's a reality that is really and radically changing from one day to another. So we are moving from a vertical, hierarchized, and unidirectional communication model to an horizontal and multidirectional one. So, what can we say about the way audiences participate in the media, how they integrate in the message of the media? The first feature would be that the audiences can now interact with the information, modify it or interpret it individually or jointly with other users, and generate new stories of their own, opinions, and even become a source for the social communication media themselves. So this is a radical change comparing with the traditional communication model and structures, where the media only was the only institution that had the ability and the power to generate public opinion. Nowadays, and we have seen sometimes in some sad examples, there are many other agents that have the ability to create changes in the society, sometimes for good, but some other times for evil. So we have to be aware of this possibility. The second feature would be that a polyvalent media consumer can easily create new spaces, generating news stories and opinions, most often removed from the flow of the mass communication, and in other occasions supported by the media themselves. So there is a competition between the contents created by the users and the interests they find in the media, and some other times they are competing with the traditional mass media creating those contents for the users. Which would be possible ways for mass media to attract audiences? The first of them all would be working with connectivity. So being connected to the audiences and cultivating a relationship of proximity with them would be one of the key aspects of getting to that goal. We have to understand proximity here, not as a geographical proximity, which was the key of the success of regional papers many years ago, but it's a personal and a sentimental proximity, maybe to the topics, maybe to the people involved, maybe for the causes we are fighting for. The second element would be articulating a sensation of sharing time and space together with interests and concerns within the same community. The opportunity to share an experience makes that those core relations with our friends, with our relatives, to become stronger. And this is one of the key elements that the media can develop and can work about. Also, media can work about building contexts so that users can identify with each other and create networks of mutual trust and collaboration. So if the media have a very strong identity, or they have an editorial line, for example, fighting for several elements that the audience can feel close to, this can be a way to make that media and that communication experience even stronger. The service that the media, the traditional mass media, can offer to audiences in internet can be service, for example. Mass media must provide services and prove themselves useful for users. So, if they learn what are the main necessities of their readers, they will be able to get closer to them. If they keep repeating once and once again the same services that maybe were related to the first traditional papers, for example, where can you find today the last pictures in the cinema, or where can you find open a drugstore this night. This is not useful for today's media readers. We have to find something different. And that possibility of giving a special service, a special information to them would be one of the keys for success. Another of the biggest tasks for media would be an open and quality participation. So loyalty is related to the service they manage to provide for audiences' need. And the topic of the possibility of sharing opinions in the media has become quite difficult to manage for those media, because there is such a huge flow of opinions that they can't control them all. And at the end, I would like to focus on a couple of ideas, and one of them is that the necessity, or at least the willingness of controlling all the contents that are appearing in those media are becoming one of the biggest difficulties to make them successful on the internet. Orientation and energizing means that a greater responsibility in filtering and generating meaning from the available data is another of the big tasks of the media. So it's not only about creating information, but about filtering information. That's a natural journalistic work. And that's why we defend many times in many different places that journalism and journalists count as much as before, and even more in the internet age, because our ability to filter information is absolutely necessary nowadays too. About management and knowledge, identifying and promoting the quality of contribution would be also something we would like to underline, because it's quite difficult in those ages to make a distinction between what's useful, what's not, what comment is really something that we could take into account, and what's rubbish or something interested that we would like to have more information. And that's also a very core ability of journalism and journalists, to have the ability to identify what's important and what not. Talking about the ways of rebuilding media reputation, here are a couple of ideas. The first one would be to be able to create a context where the audiences can interact with the medium and with other users. Here, we've got also quite a lot of problems, because interacting with readers, interacting with users, brings a lot of pressure for journalists and for media professionals. A lot of pressure, because sometimes they get so many opinions, and those opinions are so harsh or so negative that sometimes they don't dare to face their audiences, and they prefer to be silent, to remain silent, and don't take into account what they are receiving. So that information they get back is sometimes a problem for the development of a dialogue between journalists or communicators and readers that probably we would all agree that would be something interesting, something necessary, and we don't find many explanations to say why is not happening this. Why is something different what's happening on the net? Maybe in that pressure we've got some of the answers. And of course, citizen collaboration, not only in the content, but also in the ways we find information and we share information. About crowdsourcing, for example, one of the examples would be citizen journalism. Here we've got a definition by Jeff Howe, defining crowdsourcing as an open call initiated by a company or institution aimed at an undefined and generally large network of people with the goal of outsourcing a function. And there are two key elements. The first one would be a multitude of individuals that is a priori undefined and heterogeneous. And the second one, the use of a call that is open to everyone. So Estelles and Gonzalez list 8 features that can be interesting to mention now. The first one would be that crowdsourcing needs a concrete task to be realized, a multitude that participates with its contributions, benefit for that multitude, an initiator, benefit for the initiator, use of a participatory process, use of an open and flexible call, and use of internet as a basic infrastructure. Especially regarding to journalism and to news, we can bring here 2 types of news crowdsourcing mentioned by Kliman, Boss, and Reader. The first one, would be permanently open calls where crowd workers provide information or documentation over an indeterminate period of time. And the second one, community reporting, users provide information on new products or tendencies about some type of online community. So before presenting some citizen journalism cases in Spain, we've got here a framework of what's the Spanish media landscape. And here we've got a list of which are the most important Spanish media. And as we can see there, most of them, between the 10 most important Spanish media on the internet, only 2 of them are native media, and those 2 native media, El Confidencial and 20 Minutos, are very similar to a general information newspaper. So the first idea would be that the information on the internet is still dominated by the traditional mass media business and enterprises. And that affects in a very important way the way they share and build and let audiences participate. The second picture of this landscape would be if we take the 500 most visited websites in Spain, which of them belongs to each type of media. So if we look to the number of unique visitors per month and per type of media, we see that the general information newspapers that are an online version of a traditional newspapers still get most of the readers on the internet, with 182 million unique visitors per month. And we've got on the next line the native newspapers, those who were born for the internet and that interact in a more special way with the readers, that only get 58 million readers per month. But for instance, sports newspapers still get 124 million users per month, and business and economy newspapers have their share, as well as magazines, radio, TVs, news agencies, and specialist websites. It's pretty clear that newspapers and printed press is still the king on the net, and that is also something that makes the way we communicate with those media different from the way we would talk with radio stations or TV stations. That's one of the effects we've got there. And we've got here 6 examples of citizen journalism, and the important thing about them is that most of them have been a failure. We haven't brought here only successful models, but all of them but one have been a failure and have disappeared. And that's about talking how the way traditional media have focused and have begin to relate with the readers hasn't been the proper one, hasn't been probably the one their audiences needed. For example, this one, Yo Periodista or I Journalist, is the way El País, which is the main newspaper in Spain, tried to connect with their audiences and let them send informations, and they filtered them, and after filtering them and checking that all the information was correct, published them as if those news were another newspaper. This only lasted from 2007 to 2010. There were some heavy problems with the checking of the quality of the information and the continuity of the information. Another example is the webpage Zu Kazetari, which is in Basque language, and that can be translated that you can also be a journalist, that offered the same possibility to readers to send their informations, and after checking them, they could publish them in the platform of the Basque Autonomous Community TV and Radio Public Corporation. And the problems were the same. The problems raised with the political issues and the political tendencies of those news items and the way they filtered them, and also with the continuous flow of information that was not high enough to keep a media working. And finally, it became what it's nowadays, this web page, and it's only a place you can send photographs about the weather or about nice pictures of the landscapes, and if you have success, they publish them on the TV news program at night. And that's the way participation has been placed on the Basque Public Corporation. This is a closed down image, so Soitu, which was another citizen journalism enterprise, and in this case, due to lack of funding, they couldn't be able to keep the website, because although they have enough information to share, they didn't belong to any media enterprise, so they didn't have the funds to keep working for more than 2 years, and they disappeared. This is one of the last that has disappeared, botup.com. The last news we see there are from 2014. And the same happened to them. They built up a website with information get by non-professional journalists that after that was re-elaborated by professional journalists and published, but they didn't have enough funds to keep it working. Tuclip.com, yourvideo.com could be translated, and in this case this was an experience developed by one of the main TV channels in Spain, Antena 3, and was something competing more or less with YouTube, but related with publishing informations. And it was closed down completely after 1 year. And this is the only example that remains alive, which is the space called Cámara Abierta, can be translated as open camera, from the Spanish Public Radio and Television Corporation, and it's in a similar way with the Basque Public Radio and Television Corporation. It's a place for sharing non-relevant information, curiosities and weather information, maybe cultural topics, but not influential or not economical or political topics are treated here. So, jumping to the conclusions, we can say that the media have to try and approach audiences and consolidate them, although we've seen that some of those tries have been quite unsuccessful, and one of the main goals of innovation is not about learning about successful models, but also from failures, and I think we've got a lot to learn about them. And to understand their demands, organize collaborative spaces for articulating social initiatives, and to energize communities from the perspective of a more committed journalism. That last part of the sentence is important because regarding to the communication and the media, we have to always to talk about what's the core essence of journalism, and not always and that's not always related with technical aspects, maybe. We have to go to the roots of what we understand about journalism. Also, we are witnessing a change of the media, or even a social paradigm, and with the rapid spread of the new information and communication technologies, and the diversity of the social uses are forcing the mass media to participate and incentivize their use. So that's what I was explaining before. They have to be a part of it, but sometimes they will have to learn about their own experiences. And finally, the changes introduced by new digital technologies and participatory audiences with significant phenomena like crowdsourcing represent a democratization of socialization of public knowledge of current affairs. So we also don't have we have to remember that although there have been some difficulties, we still can take advantage of the use of all these possibilities. So this was the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Simón. We have 30 minutes for a debate. 30. So, ball is on your side if you want to ask something to Professor João Correia or Professor Simón.
I have a question for Professor...
Wait, just a little bit.
Yeah. For Professor Correia, did I say it? Okay, thank you.
It's a good try.
Thanks. Well, first, just can you clarify by providing a definition for power? What power is, yours at least?
What power is in your days? It's a very good question. Well, what I find that, may I use the micro please? What I find in the two very different authors, it was an idea of power that highlights interdependence and some kind of erosion of his possibilities. For instance, political cycles are becoming, how do we say it? How can I say it? Are becoming smaller. The power, we get power, but we get power for less time. We get power with high levels of intensity, but in a minimal period, in a less period of time, and the power of our enterprises, the power of our political and administrative, devices are so interconnected. They are not so absolute as they were before. Is like if power, there are a strong inequality in distribution of power, but each instance of power per se is less and less power, less and less owner of that intensity of power for less time, without with less capable of acting, without making bargains with another powers, so and so. Interdependence, probably the idea of an empire that has no center, that is much more pluricentrical, that is much more that is much more that is much more difficult to impose his own will without making bargains, without making negotiations, and without considering the evolving surrounding environment.
Thank you. Can I just have one comment and then one more question for the panel, if that's okay? Because I saw in one part of your talk that one of the arguments was that power was decaying, and I don't remember who said that within your talk. And I've always thought of power as kind of more about controlling people's minds. And
Yes.
I think what's really changing here is the battleground in which power plays out, which I think of as the media. Old media, new media is the battleground where power,
Yes.
where we control people's minds. And so I think of it in those terms. And then one question for both or either of you is, both of your presentations were kind of coming at the horizontal flows, the new media landscape, and implications for power and order from the perspective of audience is a word that you used, or user perspective, I think you could say. How do we engage users more in a constructive way? And I was wondering if you had something to say a little more along the lines of the existing power structures and the way that they appropriate or perhaps don't appropriate new media to hold on to their power, as opposed to people shaking up the power scene, you know, as individuals or as an audience.
Probably. We must.
Yes, it is. I think it's a very interesting question because we've seen, and there is some research about this, that media and media online especially control content related to opinion. And if you want to share opinion in a media, you have to register and give some information about yourself. And also you are being filtered, all the opinions you have, but not only by keywords, but sometimes by also a human person that is checking what you're saying and maybe filtering it. And of course, you are being filtered and evaluated by other users. So I think one of the things that makes us think more about the power relation with audience is why opinion is the most controlled element in the media. And I think it's quite a good example of what you are meaning. So I think the way of controlling what we say it's one of the main features of the mass media. Are not interested in sharing opinions, but in controlling a huge number of audiences and readers. So this can be one of the explanations.
Let me clarify something. I don't share any apocalyptical view of the media landscape. I think there are opportunities to take part on the political power, and those opportunities are higher than ever. But power is itself also adapting, adjusting its strategies to a networked world. So its strategies are much more subtle, and they are much more considering in their strategies the idea of having to share something. Of course, that share of power has always a strategical intention behind them, but the share also opens real opportunities, and it's not an option that power really wants to exercise. It's an option that it was obliged to consider in order to sustain its own power, to sustain power. So there are contradictions, of course, there are tensions, but there are conditions for ordinary people to have more power of influence, opinions, and to share their opinions. And there are also some opportunities to great traditional powers to be obliged to share some of their traditional way of exercising power. If there is a moral or a political option behind it, I'm not sure. I think that's a reality that arises from a networked world. Just that.
Thank you for your presentations.
Okay, so I also had a question, and as I own the mic, I'm going to pose it regarding what Professor João said. It's for Scott. João said we have a kind of dance between empowerment and disempowerment to the masses. Do you agree with that? Because I didn't quite catch your opinion.
Yes, I agree with it. That I like the metaphor of the dance a lot. Yes, and my question was more coming from a concern that that maybe people are not recognizing enough how the existing governments are using new media to hold on to what they have. I think that the dance, in the literature, I think most of the attention is getting paid on the way that we participate in this dance in new ways and with new numbers. And I think that one of the things that could use more emphasis in the literature is the other side of the dance. Maybe autocratic uses of it, or even power structures within democracies and their uses to hold on to what they've got. Because this is a tool for existing power structures as much as it's a tool for autonomous individuals, I think.
I totally agree. Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
Yes, 2 questions. We still have time. Thank you. 2 questions for Simón and Koldo, of course. First one is about more of the role of journalism, when you said that there is a greater responsibility in filtering meaning from journalism in this nowadays context. How do you relate this with the public and private contents? Also, because you mentioned filtering meanings, I was thinking also about the possibility of building meanings, building public meanings out of private data or something like that. How do you figure the role of journalism in this filtering and building meanings related to the public and private question? And the other one was to ask you for a comment about the Spanish scene. I'm not sure if I'm correct in my analysis, but now we seem to have a great vitality in social movements, protest movements, political movements, using mobile media and new media for organizing, etc. Even the new political parties in a very horizontal way. And on the other side, we have citizen journalism not surviving, not in being able to affirm itself. So where the mobile media could be used by citizens, don't know if you have a comment on that.
Thank you very much for the question, because it allows me to explain a bit more maybe some of the ideas that were undeveloped on the presentation. About citizen journalism, I think that all the people working in journalism and communication, we share the opinion that journalism is a profession. And a profession requires somebody who makes that his work, and requires continuity, requires knowledge, requires preparation, requires education, and requires the willing of make it possible a basic human right of being informed and being able to share information. So being a professional, it's the core element for the media, and that's the reason why we analyze the traditional media and traditional mass media, because they have the opportunity to make that basic human right possible. But of course there is a complementary way, which is citizen journalism. But that movement of citizen journalism lacks something that profession doesn't, and it's the willing of being continuous, being well prepared, being able to get funding to keep that website or that whatever you want on time and during many days. And of course, it's related to the very nature of communication and journalism. And it's that it's something you don't do or you don't build from 1 month to another. It's something you need to build from 1 minute to another. And that requires a lot of dedication, a lot of time. So I think that the citizen journalism must be understood as something complementary that shows a different picture of the reality, but it's not something that it's going to replace traditional journalism, because we need traditional journalism. We need somebody who every day is getting a wage for giving us the information we need to be better citizens. So I think it's...
But it appears that the citizen journalism cannot exist, not even as a complement, because it fades.
Yes, it's difficult, but
in the Spanish experience, I think
it will find its place, I think, and I think that probably the experience will be different in different areas or topics. And maybe in politics, we've got lots of examples of native media talking about politics, and mainly in opinion. And maybe in another fields, we haven't seen so developed examples of citizen journalism. Citizen journalism will exist and opinion will exist. But I think that that's one idea, one way, but we wouldn't let citizens to take care of the health system. We wouldn't let citizens to take care about defending ourselves on a trial, for example. They can do that, and they can have very good opinions, and they can solve our life if we have an accident and no doctor arrives and somebody helps us and saves our life. So, but we wouldn't let them to do that for the whole society. So we can have journalistic actions, units, but the profession itself is still necessary. So maybe that's the reason why we always are looking at the traditional media and the mass media, what they are doing, why they are doing that, and I'm sure that in the near future we will know some participatory and some citizen journalism websites or that are successful, of course, but I don't think they would replace at all the traditional media we know.
No.
Just to finish this, it's a pity that you're not going to be tomorrow, because I will be talking a little bit about this, but it's exactly as you said, it's complementary. There were, at least regarding mobile images, some journalistic moments that apply exactly to what you said, if the citizen was before the professional, on the spot. If, for example, there was an earthquake or I don't know, a political leak, like...
London tube bombings is a great example.
Which one?
London tube bombings.
London bombings was probably one of the first ones, was the first one, in fact, because the journalists couldn't enter into the metro. But there's a timeline of kind of moments. It's not citizen journalism it's a utopia, in fact, because it takes a lot of time. And what I think is that what I also think is that all your examples, most of them were between 2007 and 2010. You said that because they had no funds, but also because for the people, it was expensive. I mean, if you didn't have broadband or the 3G, the 4G, we're speaking about another time, another moment in time. So, and regarding your question, the meaning is they want, the meaning is so important because it's, they create taste.
Yeah.
So it's a creation of taste. So if the traditional media want the user to read this newspaper and not the other one, I mean, your taste is tilted to reading, I don't know, Republicans, not Democrats, or left-wing newspaper, right-wing newspaper. So it's a matter, for me personally, taste creation.
Sorry, just one thing related to what you mentioned about public and private nature of this media. It raises an old question about media, and is that if we still need public media, for example, or we can trust only in private media corporations. So that's one of the roots of the debate. Information is something so important that we have to give it public funding to be absolutely sure that the public will get the right to get information and to be able to take decisions. And it's something that is related with this, and related with the media that were closed on 2010. Another of the reasons for this was, I didn't mention, but it's very clear, was the rise of social networks. Social networks have absorbed a great deal of the participation and the way we communicate with each other. And I didn't mention it, but it's something very important. And when you said about 2010, it's one of the reasons for that.
I was going to talk about that. I mean, maybe we could differentiate between citizen journalism platforms and the failure you have talked about, and citizen journalism as a kind of activity we all media users can have, and we cannot have it. We don't need to have it to do it all the time. I mean, and people probably now they do these kind of things like posting picture or expressing their opinions about their local news that no other big media is talking about in Twitter or in Facebook, and then sometimes they got a lot of audience. So. I mean, citizen journalism is active, but nobody do think about that like a kind of professional, like people doing that all the time in some specific platforms, but just doing a kind of thing you can do, and not only when you are the first, as the examples that are clear, but very often when you think that the information, I think about the Spanish mediascape, I think the information is very biased, when there's not some opinions or some facts are being hidden and people are not talking about that. I was thinking, for instance, all of the public or amateur journalists covering the evictions, for instance, and all this, and most of the images and the information we get about that come first, not from professional citizens, professional journalists, but from citizens. So I will think about that more. I like it's kind of a kind of activity you can have among all the repertoire of media activities, instead of something specialized. And if you think about this in this kind, I don't think it's a failure. I think it's quite alive. And also, it depends on the mediascape. I mean, if you are in a country where there are a lot of things that they are not covered by professional media, probably you have more room for this kind of citizen media. Well, I guess.
I think that the best part is your conclusion, where you said the importance is socialization of public knowledge of current affairs. That would be the key. It's not becoming or not citizen journalists. I mean, it's more of the socialization of public knowledge.
I would like to put you a question, if you don't mind. Ricardo, me, and João Carlos, that is somewhere, we worked for 3 years with public journalism. It's not quite the same thing as citizen journalism, but the idea was somewhat similar. What I find that most of journalists are not prepared to have an ethnographic look for society. Just to put the news values are too centric, too newspaper centric. The idea of agenda is so self-referential that is difficult to journalists to deal with the mind of publics, to understand what is happening in the mind of publics, but to understand what is in the mind of publics, to have that kind of ethnographic look, you must to spend lots and lots and lots of money. And well, there will be only two chances, or it will be a corporate bet, and is what happened in United States with public journalism, or will be something more or less epiphenomenic. What do you think about it?
Yes, that's true. One of the things I think we've learned from the research we've made about journalists is that they don't like that much talking with their audiences. The unidirectional process is something journalists and communication professionals like, because they don't like to get that much feedback, because first of all they don't have the ability to answer to them all, and many times that feedback is not adequate, or we can call it in many different ways. So the bidirectionality of the communication in the new media and the internet is more a fantasy nowadays than a reality with the traditional media, if we are talking about the mass media. And related to the things that were mentioned here, we can see, for instance, in the social networks, that there are lots and lots of journalistic moments in the flows of the social networks. If we follow the hashtags or whatever, there is a lot of important information, but sometimes there are days with no information at all, and there are some other elements. But also in the research that has been made on the analysis of the contents of the tweets, we learned that the 80% or the 90% of the users even don't read the links they are sharing. So we learned that maybe social networks are mainly a platform for sharing information that somebody has previously made, and we give them the authority to write those information. So we jump again back to the mass media and the traditional media. And I think that's quite an interesting movement, because we have a lot of freedom nowadays to share information and to become our own active users of the internet and the reality. But if we are always jumping back to the old roles and the old models we've known during the last decades. And that's something interesting. Of course, there are good examples, fantastic examples of new patterns and new ways of communicating. And I think we have to follow them, because probably in 10 or 20 or 50 years' time, they will be the guide to create new and different things. But it's something about what we need and what we share. And we need good information, and we share good information. And that's one of the realities, I think, nowadays in the social networks. And sometimes we mix, and sadly enough, we mix trivial things with important things, and with all of them we create a new reality, which is very absurd, because has no link and no backbone. It's something related to different units that make a completely broken reality. But, well, that's a reality we have.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are already ahead of the time for the conference, so I want to thank presenters Simón and Professor Correa, and also this great audience. You can continue this debate tomorrow. Thank you.